The divorce papers lay neatly on Alpha King Kieran Blackmore's desk. His signature was already there. Only one remained: Queen Lydia Ashbourne's. For a long time, Kieran simply stared at the elegant script that would end 5 years of marriage. Outside his study, the palace bustled with preparations for the harvest festival. Servants hurried through marble halls carrying flowers, banners, and lanterns. Music drifted in through the open window. Inside the room, there was only silence. He remembered a time when Lydia would have burst through the doors without knocking, laughing as she dragged him away from his endless paperwork. That woman seemed to belong to another lifetime. Now they occupied separate wings of the palace. They shared breakfast only when royal protocol demanded it. At council meetings, she addressed him as "Your Majesty." He answered with "Your Grace." Always polite, always respectful, never close. To the kingdom, they were the perfect royal couple. They smiled during ceremonies. They stood hand in hand for portraits. They danced exactly once at every royal banquet. No one noticed that. The moment the music ended, they quietly stepped apart. At first, Kieran had tried to bridge the growing distance. He invited her on evening walks through the palace gardens. She always smiled gently. "I'm a little tired tonight." He left flowers in her chambers. She thanked him with a handwritten note. He suggested they spend time away from court. She claimed the kingdom needed them both. There had never been anger between them. Somehow, that hurt even more. Arguments meant someone was still fighting for something. Silence felt like surrender. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." His chief advisor, Lord Cedric, entered carrying a stack of council reports. His gaze drifted to the divorce decree. "So, you've decided." Kieran nodded without looking up. "I think she stopped loving me years ago." Cedric hesitated before speaking. "The kingdom needs an heir. It also deserves a queen who still wishes to stand beside her king." The words landed heavily because they echoed Kieran's own thoughts. He had watched Lydia withdraw further each passing year. She never reached for his hand anymore, never questioned his late nights in the council chamber, never complained when he forgot anniversaries. It was as though she had quietly accepted a life without him. Perhaps she preferred it that way. Kieran folded the decree carefully and slipped it into a leather folder. "I'll give it to her after the harvest festival." Cedric bowed. "It is a merciful choice." After the advisor left, Kieran remained alone. His eyes wandered to a framed painting on the bookshelf. It had been created shortly after their wedding. He and Lydia were laughing together beneath a full moon, their foreheads touching, their wolves standing proudly behind them. He reached out and traced the edge of the frame. "When did we lose each other?" he whispered. There was no answer, only the distant sound of celebration echoing through the palace. As evening settled over the kingdom, unexpected news spread through the royal halls. Queen Lydia's mother had arrived without warning. Kieran slipped the folder containing the divorce papers beneath his arm. He decided he would greet his mother-in-law before the night's festivities began. He had no way of knowing that before the evening was over, one conversation outside a closed door would change everything he believed about his marriage. The divorce papers lay neatly on Alpha King Kieran Blackmore's desk. His signature was already there. Only one remained: Queen Lydia Ashbourne's. For a long time, Kieran simply stared at the elegant script that would end 5 years of marriage. Outside his study, the palace bustled with preparations for the harvest festival. Servants hurried through marble halls carrying flowers, banners, and lanterns. Music drifted in through the open window. Inside the room, there was only silence. He remembered a time when Lydia would have burst through the doors without knocking, laughing as she dragged him away from his endless paperwork. That woman seemed to belong to another lifetime. Now they occupied separate wings of the palace. They shared breakfast only when royal protocol demanded it. At council meetings, she addressed him as "Your Majesty." He answered with "Your Grace." always polite, always respectful, never close. To the kingdom, they were the perfect royal couple. They smiled during ceremonies. They stood hand in hand for portraits. They danced exactly once at every royal banquet. No one noticed that. The moment the music ended, they quietly stepped apart. At first, Kieran had tried to bridge the growing distance. He invited her on evening walks through the palace gardens. She always smiled gently. "I'm a little tired tonight." He left flowers in her chambers. She thanked him with a handwritten note. He suggested they spend time away from court. She claimed the kingdom needed them both. There had never been anger between them. Somehow, that hurt even more. Arguments meant someone was still fighting for something. Silence felt like surrender. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." His chief advisor, Lord Cedric, entered, carrying a stack of council reports. His gaze drifted to the divorce decree. "So, you've decided." Kieran nodded without looking up. "I think she stopped loving me years ago." Cedric hesitated before speaking. "The kingdom needs an heir. It also deserves a queen who still wishes to stand beside her king." The words landed heavily because they echoed Kieran's own thoughts. He had watched Lydia withdraw further each passing year. She never reached for his hand anymore, never questioned his late nights in the council chamber, never complained when he forgot anniversaries. It was as though she had quietly accepted a life without him. Perhaps she preferred it that way. Kieran folded the decree carefully and slipped it into a leather folder. "I'll give it to her after the harvest festival." Cedric bowed. "It is a merciful choice." After the advisor left, Kieran remained alone. His eyes wandered to a framed painting on the bookshelf. It had been created shortly after their wedding. He and Lydia were laughing together beneath a full moon, their foreheads touching, their wolves standing proudly behind them. He reached out and traced the edge of the frame. "When did we lose each other?" he whispered. There was no answer, only the distant sound of celebration echoing through the palace. As evening settled over the kingdom, unexpected news spread through the royal halls. Queen Lydia's mother had arrived without warning. Kieran slipped the folder containing the divorce papers beneath his arm. He decided he would greet his mother-in-law before the night's festivities began. He had no way of knowing that before the evening was over, one conversation outside a closed door would change everything he believed about his marriage. The palace was unusually quiet. Most of the servants had gathered in the grand courtyard to prepare for the harvest festival, leaving the royal corridors almost empty. Kieran walked toward Lydia's private sitting room with measured steps. The leather folder containing the divorce papers rested beneath his arm. He intended to greet Lydia's mother first. Then, after the festival, he would quietly end their marriage. As he approached the carved oak door, he heard something that made him stop. A sob, soft, broken. He froze. It was Lydia. For 5 years he had seen her smile politely, bow gracefully, and carry herself with perfect composure. He couldn't remember the last time he had heard her cry. Inside the room, her mother's gentle voice broke the silence. "Lydia, have you finally told him?" There was a long pause. Kieran almost walked away. The conversation was private. He had no right to hear it. Then Lydia answered. "No." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I promised the physicians I never would." His hand tightened around the folder. "Physicians?" Her mother sighed heavily. "You've hidden it long enough. I know. But if Kieran learns the truth," Lydia's voice cracked, "he'll never let me go." Confusion swept through him. Let her go? What was she talking about? Her mother reached for her hand. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore." A faint laugh escaped Lydia, though it sounded more like a sob. "I do. Because if he stays only because he feels sorry for me, that isn't love." Kieran frowned. Nothing about this conversation made sense. Then Lydia spoke the words that shattered the world he thought he understood. The poison from the assassination attempt. It never completely left my body. His heart stopped. The healers tried everything. They thought they had saved me. But the poison settled inside my wolf. They've watched it spread for years. Her breathing became uneven. Last month, they told me I have less than a year. The leather folder slipped from Kieran's numb fingers. The divorce papers scattered silently across the polished floor. Inside the room, neither woman noticed. Lydia wiped away her tears. So I became distant. I stopped asking him to stay. I stopped reaching for him. I wanted him to believe I had fallen out of love. Her mother wept openly now. My precious girl, you carried this by yourself. I had to. Lydia stared at the fire burning in the hearth. I wanted him to remember me laughing, not lying in bed while the poison slowly stole everything I was. She closed her eyes. If he hates me, he'll survive. If he watches me die, I'm not sure he ever will. Outside the door, Kieran could no longer breathe. Every memory rushed back at once. The evenings she said she was tired. The royal events she quietly canceled. The long sleeves she wore, even in summer. The way she smiled just enough to convince everyone she was well. He had mistaken sacrifice for indifference. He had mistaken love for rejection. Slowly, he knelt to gather the divorce papers scattered around his feet. His hands trembled so violently that he could barely hold them. A few moments earlier, he had come to ask his wife for one final signature. Now, he would have given anything to erase his own. Kieran didn't sleep that night. He remained alone in his study until dawn, Lydia's words echoing through his mind. The poison never completely left my body. I have less than a year. Every belief he had clung to over the past 5 years had crumbled. His thoughts drifted back to the day everything had changed. It was the spring renewal procession, the happiest celebration in the kingdom. The streets overflowed with cheering citizens. Children tossed flower petals before the royal carriage. Kieran and Lydia stood side by side, waving to the crowds. They had been married only a few months. She laughed easily then, her hand never far from his. The future had seemed limitless. Then a sharp whistle cut through the air. An arrow. Before Kieran could react, Lydia saw it. Kieran! She threw herself against him with all her strength. The poisoned arrow meant for his heart buried itself deep into her shoulder. The crowd erupted into panic. Royal guards chased the assassin, while Kieran caught Lydia as she collapsed into his arms. No, he whispered desperately. No, stay with me. Despite the pain twisting across her face, she managed a weak smile. I told you. I'd always protect you. For days, the palace healers fought to keep her alive. They drew out the poison, mixed ancient herbs, called shamans from distant packs. At last, the fever broke. The kingdom rejoiced. Bells rang from every tower. Citizens celebrated the miracle of their queen's recovery. Kieran believed the nightmare was over. He couldn't have been more wrong. Weeks later, the chief physician asked to speak with Lydia alone. When she emerged, her face was calm. Too calm. What did he say? Kieran asked. She smiled gently. Just that I need more rest. He accepted the answer. He trusted her. He never imagined she was protecting him. The physicians had discovered traces of the poison, buried deep within her wolf's spirit. It wasn't spreading quickly, but it wasn't leaving either. There was no cure. Only time. Lydia made every physician swear an oath of silence. If the king knows, she told them, he'll spend every remaining day trying to save me instead of leading the kingdom. From that day forward, she began letting him go, one small step at a time. She stopped waiting for him after council meetings. She declined evening walks. She smiled instead of reaching for his hand. Each act of distance broke her heart, but she believed it would spare his. Back in the present, the first rays of dawn slipped through the study windows. Kieran looked at the divorce decree lying on his desk. Without hesitation, he carried it to the fireplace. The flames caught the parchment immediately. He watched until every signature turned to ash. "This marriage," he whispered, "ends only when hope does." An hour later, before the palace had fully awakened, Kieran saddled his own horse. He left no royal escort, no announcement, only a brief letter for the council. It contained a single sentence: "Do not look for me." Then the Alpha King disappeared beyond the palace gates, determined to search every corner of the world until he found a future for the woman who had already sacrificed everything to save his life. By the third day, the entire kingdom knew its Alpha King had vanished. The royal council searched every road leading from the capital. Messengers were dispatched to neighboring packs. Scouts combed the forests. None found him. Only the brief note left on his desk remained. "Do not look for me." Rumors spread quickly. Some believed the king had abandoned the throne. Others whispered that enemies had captured him. Only Kieran knew the truth. He was chasing hope. His journey took him first to the Frost Peak Mountains, where an elderly healer was said to cure illnesses with herbs that grew beneath the snow. The woman listened patiently as Kieran described Lydia's condition. When he finished, she lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry. I can ease pain. I cannot cleanse poison that has entered a wolf's soul." He thanked her and continued. Next came the Emerald Marshes. A shaman there claimed to speak with ancient wolf spirits. For 2 nights, Kieran waited while sacred incense filled the air. The answer never changed. The poison is old. It has rooted itself too deeply. Still, he refused to stop. He crossed rivers swollen by spring rains. He climbed cliffs where even wolves struggled to find footing. He visited rival kingdoms whose rulers eyed him with suspicion before allowing their physicians to examine the records he carried. Some offered sympathy. Others offered false hope in exchange for gold. Kieran accepted neither. He wanted truth, not comfort. Weeks turned into months. His beard grew longer. His royal cloak became stained with mud and dust. He no longer looked like the polished Alpha King who had left the palace. He looked like a husband who had forgotten how to give up. Back in the capital, the council grew increasingly anxious. Lord Cedric finally sent a trusted messenger. The rider found Kieran resting beside a mountain stream. "The kingdom needs you," the messenger pleaded. "The council fears unrest." Kieran stared at the flowing water for a long moment. Then he handed the man a sealed letter. "Deliver this." When Cedric opened it 2 days later, it contained only one sentence. "I'll come home when I find my wife a future." The message spread through the palace. For the first time, the council understood why their king had disappeared. No one asked him to return again. Late one evening, as the sun disappeared behind towering cliffs, Kieran reached a forgotten valley few travelers ever entered. An old shepherd pointed toward a narrow opening hidden behind a waterfall. "The Moon Caverns," the shepherd said quietly. "They've been abandoned for centuries. People say the first Alpha healers once lived there. Most who enter find only darkness. And those who do find someone, they're never the same when they leave." With nothing left to lose, Kieran stepped through the curtain of falling water. The cavern swallowed the fading daylight. Deep within the ancient stone passages, a calm voice echoed through the darkness. "I've been waiting for you, Alpha King." An elderly blind healer emerged from the shadows. Though her clouded eyes could not see him, she somehow looked directly into his soul. The old healer sat beside a pool of perfectly still water, deep within the moon caverns. Its surface reflected the glow of pale crystals embedded in the stone walls. She motioned for Kieran to sit. "You've traveled far." Kieran lowered himself onto the cold rock. "I'll travel farther if I have to." The healer gave a faint smile. "That answer tells me everything I need to know." She asked him to describe Lydia's illness. He spoke of the poisoned arrow, the years of quiet exhaustion, the fading strength hidden behind practiced smiles, the physician's hopeless verdict. When he finished, Silence settled over the cavern. Finally, the healer dipped her fingers into the water. The poison cannot be cured. Kieran's shoulders slumped. For a moment, every mile he had traveled seemed meaningless. Then she continued. But it can be shared. His head lifted. What do you mean? The healer traced a circle across the water's surface. Long-forgotten symbols shimmered beneath the ripples. In the age of the first Alpha Kings, mates were bound by more than vows. They carried one another's burdens. When a curse entered one soul, the other could willingly bear part of it. Kieran leaned forward. How? A sacred ritual. The poison cannot be destroyed. It must be divided. She met his gaze, though her blind eyes remained clouded. When the ritual is complete, your queen will carry only half the poison, and I carry the other half. The healer nodded. Yes, it will permanently weaken your wolf. You will never possess the strength you once had. You may tire more easily. Old wounds will ache. Some abilities will never fully return. Kieran did not hesitate. When do we begin? A soft laugh escaped the healer. I thought you might ask how dangerous it was. I already know the answer. She tilted her head. And what answer is that? If it saves Lydia, it's worth any price. The healer's expression grew solemn. Love makes brave people. It also makes stubborn ones. She rose slowly and walked toward an ancient stone altar. The ritual requires both mates to choose it freely. I cannot force it. You cannot command it. Kieran frowned. She'll refuse. Of course she will. The healer brushed centuries of dust from the altar. She spent 5 years convincing herself your happiness mattered more than her life. She won't suddenly stop protecting you. The truth settled heavily between them. Finding the cure had never been the hardest part. Convincing Lydia to accept it would be. The healer handed him a small silver pendant, engraved with the symbol of 2 wolves standing beneath a full moon. When she doubts your reasons, show her this. It belonged to the last Alpha King who completed the ritual. Kieran closed his fingers around the pendant. It felt surprisingly warm. Thank you. The healer smiled gently. Don't thank me yet. The ritual shares more than poison. It also demands complete honesty. No hidden fears, no unspoken regrets. If either of you keeps even one truth locked away, the bond will fail. Kieran thought of the 5 years they had spent protecting each other with silence. Perhaps the ritual had begun long before they reached the temple. Perhaps it began the moment they finally chose the truth. With renewed hope, he left the moon caverns and turned his horse toward home. For the first time since hearing Lydia's confession outside that closed door, he carried something greater than hope. He carried a chance. When Kieran returned to the palace, the servants stared as though they had seen a ghost. His clothes were worn from weeks of travel. His boots were caked with mud. A beard shadowed his face, but his eyes held a determination no one had seen before. He did not stop to greet the council. He did not enter the throne room. He walked straight to Lydia's chambers. She was standing by the window when he entered. The moment she saw him, relief flashed across her face. It vanished almost instantly, replaced by anger. You disappeared. Her voice trembled. You left without a word. The entire kingdom thought something terrible had happened. Kieran closed the door quietly behind him. I know. You abandoned your kingdom, and you abandoned me. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Kieran answered softly. I finally understand why you abandoned me first. Lydia's expression froze. You heard. I heard everything. The strength left her shoulders. She turned away, unable to face him. I never wanted you to know. I know. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks. I thought if you believed I stopped loving you, moving on would be easier. Kieran stepped closer. Do you know what I believed? She slowly shook her head. I believed I had become someone you tolerated. I thought every quiet dinner, every canceled walk, Every night we slept apart meant your love had faded. Lydia covered her face with trembling hands. I was trying to save you, and I was mourning you while you were still alive. His words broke the last wall between them. She began to sob openly. I was so afraid. The poison kept getting worse. Every time I woke up weaker, I wondered if it would be my last morning. I couldn't bear watching you lose me one day at a time. Kieran gently took her hands away from her face. For the first time in years, he held them. I should have asked why. I should have seen your pain, instead of assuming your silence meant rejection. She looked into his eyes. I thought I was protecting your heart. You were. He smiled sadly. But you forgot something. My heart was always yours to protect with me. Not from me. She let out a shaky laugh through her tears. I missed you. So much. I missed you too. More than either of them realized, he reached into his cloak and removed the silver pendant from the moon caverns. The twin wolves gleamed softly in the afternoon light. There is a way. Hope flickered across Lydia's face before fear quickly replaced it. What kind of way? He explained the ancient ritual, the poison, the sharing, the cost. When he finished, Lydia stepped back immediately. No. Lydia, no. Her voice was firm despite the tears. I won't let you destroy your wolf to save mine. Kieran moved closer, until only a single step separated them. You once threw yourself in front of an arrow for me. I never asked your permission to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve that gift. She shook her head desperately. I'm afraid. So am I. He smiled gently. But fear has already stolen 5 years from us. He lifted her hands between his own. I'm done giving it any more. Lydia searched his face for a long time. At last, she whispered the words that neither of them had expected to say. If we do this, we face it together. Kieran nodded. Together. For the first time since the poisoned arrow changed their lives, neither of them was carrying the burden alone. The Moon Temple had not witnessed the ancient bonding ritual for centuries. Its stone walls, carved with the images of wolves standing beneath a full moon, seemed to hold their breath as Kieran and Lydia entered together. Word spread quickly through the kingdom. The Alpha King and Queen had secluded themselves inside the temple. No one knew why. Only the elderly blind healer from the moon caverns stood waiting beside the ancient altar. She placed the silver pendant between them. You have both chosen this freely? Kieran answered first. I have. Lydia looked at her husband. Not the distant king she had lived beside for 5 lonely years. The man who had crossed mountains because he refused to lose her. I have. The healer nodded. Then speak one truth you have never dared to say. Kieran turned to Lydia. I never stopped loving you. I only stopped believing you still loved me. Tears filled Lydia's eyes. I loved you every single day. I was just too frightened to let you see how much I was losing. The pendant began to glow with a soft silver light. The healer smiled. The bond accepts your truth. She instructed them to place their hands over the ancient moonstone at the center of the altar. The temple filled with a low, steady hum. Silver markings spread across the stone floor, connecting their feet like the roots of an ancient tree. A brilliant light surrounded them. Lydia gasped. Pain surged through her body, as though the poison had suddenly awakened. Kieran reached for her hand. Stay with me. Dark veins crawled beneath Lydia's skin before slowly beginning to fade. At the same time, matching veins appeared along Kieran's arm. The poison was moving, sharing itself. Neither resisted. Neither pulled away. The light grew so bright that the healer had to shield her eyes. Then, all at once, everything became still. Kieran and Lydia collapsed together onto the temple floor. Outside, the great doors remained closed. The royal council waited in silence. Servants knelt in prayer. Citizens filled the temple courtyard, refusing to leave. One day passed. Neither awakened. Then another. the kingdom fell into uneasy quiet. On the third day, even the physicians began preparing for the worst. Lord Cedric stood at the temple steps every sunrise. "If either of them wakes," he whispered, "the kingdom will endure." Before dawn on the fourth day, an eerie silence settled across the mountains. Then a single wolf's howl pierced the air. A moment later, another answered. The two voices rose together beneath the fading stars. The temple doors slowly opened. Kieran stepped into the morning light, leaning heavily on Lydia's shoulder. She looked pale, he looked exhausted. Both had streaks of silver now woven through their hair. Neither stood as strongly as before, but both were alive. The blind healer smiled from the doorway. "The poison has been divided. It will always remain, but it will never again belong to only one heart." As the crowd erupted in relieved cheers, Kieran looked at Lydia and smiled. For the first time in 5 years, their future no longer belonged to fear. It belonged to both of them. 6 months after the ritual, the kingdom had settled into a new rhythm. Kieran tired more quickly than he once had. Long council sessions left him exhausted. Lydia still had days when the lingering poison made every step feel heavy. Neither had been fully healed, but every sunrise they shared felt like a gift they had nearly lost. One crisp autumn morning, the royal council gathered in the great hall. Whispers filled the chamber. Many believed the king had finally called the meeting to announce his divorce. After all, the decree had never been presented. No official explanation had ever been given. Kieran entered first, dressed in his ceremonial robes. Lydia walked beside him, not behind, not several steps away, beside him. Their hands were intertwined. The sight alone silenced the room. Kieran stopped before the throne, but did not sit. Instead, he reached into a leather folder. Several council members exchanged knowing glances. Then he withdrew the divorce decree. The parchment still bore his signature. Slowly, he held it above a bronze brazier. The flames caught the edges. Within moments, the decree curled into ash. A murmur swept through the hall. Kieran watched the last fragment disappear before speaking. "Half a year ago, I believed my marriage had ended. I was wrong. I confused silence with the absence of love. I believed distance meant rejection." He turned toward Lydia. In truth, it was two people trying to carry the same burden alone. He took her hand. "The easiest promise to make is forever." His voice softened. "The hardest promise is choosing each other again after life gives you every reason not to." The council stood in respectful silence. Some wiped away tears. Others lowered their heads, remembering how close the kingdom had come to losing both its rulers. Then Lydia did something no one expected. She stepped forward and smiled at Kieran. "I accepted your proposal once because it united our packs." A ripple of laughter moved gently through the hall. She continued, "But today, I have a question." Kieran raised an eyebrow. She knelt on one knee. The entire chamber gasped. "My king, my husband, my greatest blessing." Her eyes sparkled with happy tears. "Will you marry me again?" For one heartbeat, Kieran simply stared. Then he laughed. A full, joyful laugh the palace had not heard in years. He helped her to her feet. "I thought you'd never ask." The hall erupted in applause. Plans for a second wedding spread across the kingdom within hours. This celebration would not mark a political alliance. It would celebrate a choice. When the ceremony took place beneath the full moon, there were no elaborate speeches, only vows. Simple, honest, and freely given. Before the evening ended, Kieran announced one final decree. Every year, on this night, every married couple in the kingdom will be invited to set aside titles, pride, and fear. They will speak one truth they have been too afraid to say. It shall be known as the Night of Honest Hearts. The people cheered, not because their king had found a tradition, but because he and his queen had found each other again. Years passed, and the Night of Honest Hearts became the most cherished tradition in the Moon Kingdom. On that evening each autumn, crowns were set aside. Royal robes were exchanged for simple clothing. For one night, there were no kings or queens, no alphas or lunas, only husbands and wives, mates and companions, sitting together beneath the moon to speak one truth they had been too afraid to say aloud. Some confessed old regrets, some admitted hidden fears, others simply whispered the words they had forgotten to say. I still need you. I'm sorry. Thank you. I love you. The tradition spread beyond the capital, until every pack in the kingdom observed it. Arguments that might have lasted years ended with honest conversations. Families grew closer. Young couples learned that silence was not strength. Truth was. Above the entrance to the palace, Queen Lydia chose the words that would greet every visitor. They were carved into white stone for generations to read. Love rarely dies because people stop caring. More often, it begins to disappear when people start hiding their pain from each other. When the stone was unveiled, Kieran stood beside her. He smiled before asking the stonemason to leave one final space beneath her inscription. Taking the chisel himself, he carefully carved his own words below hers. The greatest threat to a marriage isn't conflict. It's the silence, created by two people trying to protect each other alone. Years later, children often asked why their king and queen had chosen those particular words. Kieran never answered first. He always looked to Lydia. She would smile and say, "Because love isn't proven by pretending everything is perfect. It's proven by trusting someone enough to let them see your pain." Time left its gentle marks upon them both. The poison never disappeared completely. There were still days when Lydia tired easily. There were mornings when Kieran's old strength failed him. But neither ever carried the burden alone again. When one stumbled, the other reached out a hand. When one grew afraid, the other stayed. The scar left by the poisoned arrow remained on Lydia's shoulder. She no longer hid it beneath long sleeves. It became a reminder, not of suffering, but of survival. One evening, as they watched the harvest festival from the palace balcony, Kieran slipped his hand into hers. "Do you remember?" he asked softly. "The day I almost asked you for a divorce?" Lydia laughed, the sound warm and free. "I do. And I remember thinking I had almost succeeded in convincing you I didn't love you." He shook his head with a smile. "We were both terrible at protecting each other." She leaned against his shoulder. "Fortunately, we became much better at loving each other." Below them, lanterns rose into the night sky, carrying hopes and prayers across the kingdom. History remembered the day the Alpha King prepared to divorce his queen. But the people remembered something far greater. A husband overheard the confession that was never meant for his ears. A wife finally laid down the burden she had carried alone. And two hearts that believed they were saying goodbye found the courage to choose each other all over again.